I feel sure that our visitors from over the seas have felt this aloha spirit in Hawaii and go away happy. And a little more of it is on tap for us at 2 o'clock sharp tomorrow. In this room, our local students in Hawaii are giving this tea for all the rest of our students from all over, and all of us are going to be welcomed here at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon in this room. Very happy about that. And I'm grateful, too, for the work that our students have done, all of our students, in the different activities here throughout all of this time. I'm very grateful, too, for those of our students who are here from overseas who are active in their own fields and have become the centers of light, sometimes in their community, sometimes in their state, sometimes in a whole nation. Naturally, no spiritual light is ever given to us for our own benefit. That would be an impossibility. When spiritual light touches us, it is that that light may radiate. And therefore each one, as they receive some measure of light, even a tiny measure, becomes active in one way or another in a spiritual capacity. That is why some of our students conduct their tape work, others are engaged in library activities, some in healing work, and in some way or other, whatever light is revealed within us must be radiated. It compels it. We have nothing to do with that. It compels it. There are people who are busy at work in one or another metaphysical activity who have not been called, who have not received the light, but it satisfies some sense of ego, ambition. But it isn't that I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of those who do receive a measure of light. When they receive it, they're immediately put to work. And not by man, not by woman. It is by the Spirit itself that entered them. Even as Paul had to risk his life over and over and over again after he changed from Saul to Paul, even as the disciples risked and endured prison, persecution, so you will find in the religious literature of the world that all who received light and went out, even if it meant the loss of their own human life, or persecution, or starvation. It is an impossibility for a person to receive light and be able to hide in a cave somewhere with it. It isn't done. It can't be done. That light itself propels one to be of service, to be active. And so it is that all of us who are engaged in any way or in any degree in this work need have no feelings about wanting credit for it or praise, because we are doing that which we are compelled to do and would have to do even if it involved persecution or imprisonment or death. Remember this, that as you proceed on this way, the very moment that you feel yourself touched with this light, it won't be long afterward when you will find yourself engaging in some form of activity. And this ultimately will be the means of perpetuating the message of the infinite way. No message will ever be perpetuated by sending out human missionaries or human lecturers or teachers or practitioners. It never will. The only way a message can be perpetuated is if the principles of that message register with one and become demonstrable. Then that very spirit itself draws unto the individual their activity, and that perpetuates it. And that's the way it must be in this work. Nevertheless, I am grateful to everyone who in any way at all is active in this message. Now, I believe that I have answered this question about purification of our desires, purification of our selfhood. It doesn't in the beginning have anything to do with trying to become better human beings. That is only the effect of the purification. The purification itself means the ability to have that mind which was in Christ Jesus, meaning the mind that does not judge, criticize, condemn, that does not have two powers, and that can impersonalize and nothingize. That is all there is to self-purification, but the act of self-purification by this means results outwardly in a changed state of what appears as human consciousness. Therefore, erroneous human traits begin to dissolve and ultimately to disappear. Probably not leaving us perfect in this world, but working in that direction. Now, I feel that for the first time, it is going to be easier for every student, every serious student of the infinite way, to attain this purification, this spiritual state of consciousness that realizes God as individual being and therefore can impersonalize every appearance of evil, because this message is now condensed into 10 tapes. The Maui Advanced Work, numbers 5 and 6, the Hawaiian Village Open, numbers 3 and 4, and the 6 tapes of this class. These 3 points have been so harped on, so persistently presented, so presented in so many different ways, and in such concentrated form, that I am sure that a student with a background of the writings can, with the help of these particular tapes, complete the development of their own spiritual consciousness through the practice of what's on these tapes. Now, the tapes are available almost everywhere. Naturally, those who want them in their own home may purchase them, but it isn't a matter of purchase. It is a matter that every community in which there is infinite way activity or in which there are infinite way students will surely have one or more sets of them, so that those students who have not the facilities for having them in their own home can certainly make arrangements to study them somewhere, sometime, with other students. And I know right well what they will do, because I know what I feel about the nature of this work. let me tell you that when we were in Holland last year, it was the night before the opening of that international conference on seeking a means of attaining world peace through spiritual means, that Emma and I were meditating. And evidently a message came to her which she did not tell me. But the next day, this lady who has been living with the Queen of Holland and has been her practitioner and teacher, and who is a most beautiful and wonderful mystic, joined us for a meditation. We went up to one of the rooms and we had a most beautiful meditation together. And while meditating, she said, "I have a message for you, Joel. And it is, Joel, go home immediately and be quiet and do not see anyone and wait for the next message that is to be given you before you start out." And as she was talking, tears came to Emma's eyes, and this woman turned around and said, "Oh yes, I know, you received the message before this." And she had. She said so. It had come the night before in those very words. And you know that immediately all work was canceled. We still had 2 months of lecture and classwork, but they were canceled. We returned home, and I had 1 full month of retreat here, seeing no one. And then after that, just a few here and there, once in a while, until on April 8th, the message was given to me. And with that began this present unfoldment. And then began the imparting of it. And it started with a tape, Halico Special number 3, on one side of which is that June letter on specific treatment. And right after that began the work on Maui, and then up here in this room, all of which has led up to this class. So that, oh yes, and then I received a letter from this lady saying, now leave for a trip to all of the countries where the Infinite Way activity is. And that letter came just about a week after I had made arrangements for our air ticket. So you see, it all works out together and convinces me that this message has been given to us in this form for the one specific reason of fulfilling a need. Heretofore, even though the letter of truth, as we've had it in this class, is in all of the writings, it has not been understood by our students, hasn't been practiced by them, even if they've understood it. And I believe, probably what is natural, that they have given more attention to the mystical side, to the inspirational side, than to learning, first of all, these specific principles and then practicing them until consciousness is developed. And therefore, if our students are to attain the mystical consciousness, it will have to come through this study and practice or purification, because this I know from inside. We cannot have any degree of mystical or spiritual consciousness as long as we have good and evil, two powers, personalization of good or evil, or consciously or unconsciously battling evil, trying to overcome it, whether to heal disease or sin or fear or lack. I know that only in proportion as our consciousness accepts the truth that ye need not fight. The battle is not yours. Only as we are able to be that consciousness which does not take up the sword, physical battles or mental battles. And incidentally, just because I've used that quotation, do not take up the sword, please do not interpret that to mean that I believe in conscientious objections. I don't. We are all citizens of our community, of our nation. And as such, we do not live unto ourselves entirely. Therefore, just as we benefit by the laws of our community, just as we benefit by this citizenship, so when we are called upon to serve it, it is our function to serve. And even though we know that wars can never be right, there can never be a right side in a war, and there never has been one, and there never will be one, nor is there a wrong side. There is only one side, and that's stupidity, greed, lust. Now, and there aren't any wars that are fought for any other reasons, regardless of who fights it. And fighting wars will not bring peace and will not bring prosperity. And they never have. They just bring intervals between wars. Nevertheless, if our nation goes to war, just remember this, that for every man who objects or refuses to be a citizen and fulfill himself, he is merely saying, you go out and get killed for me. Because when the government decides on having 1 million men, it's going to have 1 million men, and if you aren't one of them, somebody else is. Therefore, we really have no moral right to say, let the other fellow get killed and not me. On the other hand, as spiritual students, we know that life is eternal. We know that the grave is not the end of our life. Therefore, we are in much better position to lose our human life than those who grieve about it and fear the experience and think it is the end of all things. And therefore, we make much less of a sacrifice than they do, for we cannot surely value this human sense of existence to the same extent that those do who have no spiritual vision. Therefore, it is better for us to place ourselves in danger than those who fear the experience. And beyond that, there is still another reason. With our understanding of spiritual law, it does not necessarily follow that we will be killed or wounded even if we go to war. And that has been demonstrated. That has been demonstrated, but tremendously, in World War I and World War II. Among those who had been metaphysically and spiritually trained, the results were far different than the statistics. Therefore, very often, our very going is an act of service and of good. I'm thinking right now of a man who was a chaplain, Christian Science chaplain, and there was a machine gun nest that couldn't be reached, couldn't be wiped out, and it held the armies here and there and prevented them uniting and going forward. And so a volunteer group was called upon to go out and draw fire so that that nest could be located and wiped out. And of course, the volunteer group quickly assembled. Now, of course, there was no possibility of their coming back. Their function was to go out and get shot, and shot vigorously enough so as to make the nest show itself where it was. This chaplain showed up at the point of departure to go with them and was told by the captain that he couldn't go. And his answer was, "I'm disobedient to orders, so shoot me when I come back." And he went out with them. And not a single man was lost, and not a single man was injured. And yet the purpose was accomplished. He was one of those men who was decorated by this government for bravery far beyond the call of duty. I'm thinking of another, also a Christian Science chaplain, who went out with mine layers and during the flu epidemic brought 13 ships back without one single man getting the flu. In the First World War, when it really was a tremendous factor. Therefore, we, above all others, not only have less to lose, or probably nothing, but we have tremendous opportunities for bringing this consciousness into active expression. So I wasn't referring to being a conscientious objector when I said not take up the sword. But I do mean that we are not to struggle physically or mentally, but rather to learn this Christ consciousness, develop this Christ consciousness that does not have to take up the sword or resist evil, but can abide in the word that thou, Pilate, hast no power over me. For there is only one power, and that is of God. Now, with all of that, our progress should be more rapid. It should show itself, first of all, in more students doing more healing work. Secondly, it should show itself forth in those students who are doing healing work, doing better healing work and quicker healing work. Thirdly, it must show itself forth in our attainment of a greater degree of Christ consciousness, because the more this particular or these particular principles are practiced, the more Christ consciousness is developing in us, or the more we are a transparency, or the better transparency we are for the activity of the Christ, and this is the mystical consciousness. Now, remember, spiritual consciousness is your consciousness when you have no evil to combat, when your evil has been impersonalized and nothingized. That is Christ consciousness. It isn't some other consciousness that's going to come to you. It is your present consciousness when your consciousness is divested of personalizing good and evil or empowering evil. Your consciousness, this very consciousness, which is you, is Christ consciousness in proportion as you are impersonalizing and nothingizing. Therefore, there is no new consciousness to gain. There is no other consciousness to go out after. It is a purification of the consciousness which we now have, and which in its purified state is Christ consciousness. In other words, Moses, after his illumination, was still Moses, but with purified consciousness. Jesus was still Jesus, but with purified or Christ consciousness. That is why he is called Jesus the Christ, Jesus the enlightened. He is still Jesus, the same Jesus, but now the enlightened. And enlightenment means only one thing: the recognition of these principles. That is what constitutes enlightenment and opens the way for illumination. The inner experiences that we have, and the inner experiences that come to us, and the instruction that comes, and the wisdom, the guidance, the direction, comes only at those times when we are living in that consciousness of no condemnation, of impersonalization. And they can't come to us at any other time. That is the full meaning of that statement, that when you go to the altar and pray, there remember that anyone has aught against thee, first get up and make thy peace. So it is. If you hope to pray someone into health, don't try it if you believe that they are diseased. Until you have come to the realization that God constitutes their being, and that this condition is the impersonal carnal mind, you have no ability to heal, and your prayers won't reach any further than your own mind. And that brings us then to the subject of prayer. Watch yourself when you believe that you are praying or that you are in prayer. Watch yourself as if you were standing in back of yourself. And note whether you're expecting something from God, whether you are attempting to influence God, whether you are hoping for some setting aside of law. Note whether or not in your praying you actually believe that God is withholding something that after this prayer is to be granted. Watch yourself at prayer so that you are not reaching up to God at all. You're merely resting in the realization of this inner communion. Watch that your prayer is a realization of God's presence, even if necessary, the statement, the declaration, or the thought of God's presence, or the affirmation of it. In one way or another, let your prayer be the realization that I and the Father are one, that the Lord is my shepherd. Let your prayer always remain on that level where it is not reaching out or up or within for something. Then you will find that prayer in its highest sense has no words and no thoughts. No words are used in prayer. No thoughts are used in prayer. It is merely an inner communion that becomes a oneness, a union with God, a resting in God. Then, too, you are a clear transparency through which God's grace touches the consciousness of all of those who are reaching out to you. It is exactly as if this room were filled with God, but no one was aware of it. They were in darkness or sin or disease or lack, as if there were no God in this room. Then one individual realizes God is. I am. God is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. I and the Father are one. All that the Father hath is mine. The Lord is my shepherd, here and now. That one, then, can rest, be still, and be a transparency, and the presence and power of God can penetrate the consciousness of those who are in darkness. That is why in our world work, when in the beginning of our prayer we do use words and thoughts leading up to that final stage, and realize, and we're thinking now of those in this world who are handled by evil, those who let themselves be outlets for evil, and we are realizing, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And let us hold them not in condemnation, but open their consciousness to this light, that they may be freed of this temptation, of this hypnotism, of whatever it is that binds them to personal sense. Now, with that, there is the removal of condemnation from them, because we have declared that it is not sin, it is merely ignorance. It is not darkness, but an absence of light. And so, in our forgiveness, in our understanding of the impersonal nature of all this, we are a transparency through which this transcendental presence can function in the consciousness of this world. And you never know where it touches or who it touches. You have no way of knowing how the light which reaches earth through the transparency of those in prayer, you have no idea how it influences legislation, how it changes decisions. You have no idea how far-reaching it is. That is why some who have attained the light do retire from this world in order, as they would phrase it, to live the life of prayer for the world, not for individuals, but for the breaking down of human consciousness, of that duality. And by remaining in their caves or remaining in their little homes somewhere alone, they permit themselves, by praying without ceasing, to be a transparency through which the light comes. And they, of course, rarely have any way of knowing who is touched by it or how, but it is evident that things do happen on earth that can't be accounted for. There are people in hospitals about to die who suddenly get well, and no one has the slightest idea of how it happens. There are times when countries are at the brink of war, and a last-minute decision changes it, and it isn't always a human thing that happened. And that leads to this. We are helped by those who have passed from our sight. You must never believe that there is a retrograde step from developed spiritual consciousness. If an individual attains spiritual consciousness on earth, they are a blessing to everyone who brings themselves within range of their consciousness, and even to some who are not aware of what is going on. But when that individual leaves this plane of consciousness, this plane of life that we call the human, nothing happens to their spiritually developed consciousness. It keeps going just the same. You can't put it in a grave. As a matter of fact, you have already learned, those of you who have practiced meditation, that I can't ever be placed in a grave. If you have ever meditated with the I, you know that I was never born and I will never die. You know that I was never confined in a physical body, much less will it ever be confined in a tomb. I and the Father are one. Therefore, we are never limited to time or space or place. I and my Father are one, and that oneness is immortality. Therefore, I go on forever and forever and forever. And that I which I am is the state of consciousness which I am. And therefore, if anyone is benefiting by it here and now on earth, you can be assured of this. Those same benefits will be going on throughout eternity. If you could be made to believe that Jesus Christ was the great light that he was, and that his 3 years in the ministry could produce an effect on the world for 20 centuries that it has, and believe that it came to an end on that cross or in that tomb, you haven't thought deeply enough. That degree of consciousness which we know as Christ Jesus could never come to an end. There'd be something wrong with God if such a light could pass from existence, if such a light could be withdrawn from the world. And I say this of Buddha, Gautama the Buddha, that if at his state of elevation he could be killed off or his consciousness nullified, there is no justice in divine kingdom. Oh no. No, that state of development or any state leading up to it is perpetual, it is eternal, and it is forever a transparency through which God reaches this earth, and that is what accounts for the individuals on earth who attain spiritual light. Just think of a man, a cobbler, with no greater religious teaching or thought than a very, very darkened theological religion, and one at the time of tremendous blackness and darkness, spiritual ignorance personified. Think of that man. In 1 second, receiving such a light that within a couple of years he was known from Switzerland to England as the greatest spiritual teacher on earth. And he became the teacher of several generations of mystics. And to this very day, the writings he left behind are read by so many hundreds of thousands of people in the world that editions are continually being published in England and in the United States. That man you recognize as Jacob Boehme of Germany. Today, there isn't a religious teaching in the world that doesn't know and recognize and honor it. Why, you know that it couldn't be an accident. You know that it couldn't be anything other than that the illumined consciousness of someone touched him. It may not have been one of those who have passed on. It may have been one on earth. But it need not have been one on earth, for John tells us, 98 A.D., that the Gospel of John was given to him by Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus Christ had disappeared from the earth 60 years, 70 years before. But he states that he received it personally from Jesus Christ. And so it is. Understand that when you pray, when you commune with God, you are at one with all men and all women who are praying. You are at one with spiritual consciousness throughout this world and the worlds that have been and the worlds that will be. You are never alone, because there is no such thing as your consciousness being locked up in your head or in your chest. or in your solar plexus. Your consciousness fills all space. That is the nature of I. I and my Father are one, and where I am, God is. And where God is, I am. And you can't localize that or finitize that, for that is an infinite relationship of an infinite being. The moment that you no longer localize, and the moment you no longer finitize, the moment you begin to understand that your consciousness is not locked up inside of you, but that it is one with every one of us in this room, then eventually you will go further and you'll realize that when you're in prayer, you are in attunement with everyone in prayer, for you unite in one consciousness. The Christ consciousness is one consciousness. And when you are abiding in that, you're abiding in Christ, whether Christ is in a foreign land or where we are. You see, the error has been that we believe we are finite beings sitting here in a body. And it isn't true. We are infinite beings. We are divine consciousness. We are God consciousness. Individualized, but never finitized, and never localized. Therefore, you are never in a place, nor are you limited to a place. Never. You can be where you want to be, merely in the realization that I and my Father are one, and I am where God is, and God is where I am. And then you find yourself where harmony is for you at any given moment. Prayer is a deep subject. Prayer must never be thought of as prayer is taught in churches, or even as prayer is given in most dictionaries. Unless you have a complete unabridged dictionary, don't accept what most dictionaries say about prayer. But all of the unabridged dictionaries do give a mystical sense of prayer, which is communion. When you're communing with God, you're not limited, you're not finite, you're not any place. You are in God. You are living and moving and having your being in God. You are dwelling in the secret place of the Most High. Nothing limited about that, nothing finite about that. We must live and move and have our being in God. We must dwell in the secret place of the Most High, and the only way to accomplish that is the prayer of communion, the prayer of realization of our relationship to God, the prayer of realization of our true identity, of the infinite nature of our own being, because God constitutes our being. If you want to know more about prayer, take it into your meditation and ask for light on prayer. Ask for guidance and direction on prayer. Ask for instruction on prayer, and the Holy Ghost will impart it. The Spirit of God in you will come alive to be your teacher, for in the last analysis, God must be your teacher. The function of a teacher on this plane is to lift the consciousness of an individual to that place where they can make contact with the Father within themselves. Part of the function of the teacher is to instruct in the correct letter of truth, but that is the least of the obligation of a teacher. The major function of a teacher is to live so high in consciousness that they are enabled to lift up those who come to them and lift them high enough so that they may have access to the kingdom of God within their own being, an access which they could not have through their mind, through the intellect, through taking thought. We only have access to the kingdom of God as we are lifted into the domain, the realm which is above mind, above thinking, above thought, above the intellect. And it is only those who have gone a step beyond us who can lift us to that place. There again, all healing work is based on that. Every time you undertake healing for someone, what you really undertake is to lift them above the physical plane of consciousness, where the laws of physicality are not operating. Then spiritual harmony takes hold of them. You are not, as a spiritual healer, you are not healing their bodies. You are not doing anything to the organs or functions of their bodies. All you are doing is lifting them in consciousness above the physical plane, above the mental plane, to where they are in the grace of God. And the grace of God wipes out the physical and the mental laws that have been binding them. That is how spiritual healing is accomplished. Spiritual consciousness nullifies both mental and physical laws. The mental laws are those of the laws of malpractice, the laws of belief, the laws of these mesmeric suggestions, and lifting the patient above the mind, the mental laws are nullified. In the same way, there are physical laws, germs, infection, contagion, climate. But when you are lifted into the higher dimension of consciousness, those laws do not operate. And then you find that even though the infections and contagions may rage around you, they do not come nigh thy dwelling place. You find that though there may be panics and depressions and unemployment, it does not come nigh thy dwelling place. Though there may be limitations of every physical form, they do not come nigh thy dwelling place. Why? Because you're not dwelling there. You're dwelling in the secret place of the Most High. You're dwelling in the mystical consciousness, where I and the Father are one, and life is lived by grace, not by physical laws, not by mental laws. And so it is that every single spiritual demonstration is an annulling of a physical or a mental law. That's what spiritual demonstration is. It is an annulling, the wiping out of the operation of physical or mental law. It is lifting you into a realm of consciousness where the particular physical or mental law from which you are suffering no longer operates. Therefore, to be a healer, it is necessary to dwell in the secret place of the Most High, to dwell in that consciousness where the physical and mental laws are not operating. This is prayer. Living mentally means determining what you want and how you are going to get it. Spiritual living is yielding to the reign of God, the kingdom of God. It is a yielding of desires, it is a yielding of the self to a receptivity of spiritual guidance. It is not an outlining and a determining of what we want or how we are to attain it. It is a yielding, a complete yielding of oneself, so that one may be the instrument through which a divine intelligence can operate. And so we come to the end of this experience, but not the end quite. because this that has been started here on the 8th of April, and which is continuing here, is going to be continued in San Diego, in Canada, and then in London and Manchester, England, and then in The Hague, Holland, and then in Switzerland, and finally back in New York in November. And I have every inner conviction that this is a cycle of work, not just an isolated work, but a cycle of work leading to whatever the next step may be. It is for that reason that when this class began, I was surely more curious than you as to what was going to unfold and how, because I knew that whatever its nature, it would give us an indication of what direction we're traveling in. And now that I've seen this, I'm sure that it's going to be a continuity of this, but on a continually progressive scale, deepening scale, broadening scale. In other words, we are just here and we've got to keep going this way so that we come finally to that state of consciousness which is our goal. Well, I started off by telling you this is a joy to me, and it is. Thank you. Thank you.